The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past was developed and published by Nintendo for the SNES. It's the third game in the Zelda franchise and in my opinion easily one of the hardest Zelda games. It was released on November 1991 in Japan but fully released worldwide by September 24, 1992. Upon its release it was immediately considered to be one of the greatest games of all time, and because of its popularity it was later ported to the Wii, Wii U, SNES Classic, Switch and the Nintendo 3DS. A Link to the Past was also compiled into 2 games for the Game Boy alongside of Four Swords Adventures and got somewhat of a reimagining in form of A Link Between Worlds. We load up A Link to the Past and just like I mentioned in the other 2 Zelda games I reviewed, we're hit by a masterpiece of an opening sequence. The 3 pieces of the Triforce closing in on each other to reveal the full Triforce, and then the logo slowly appears from within the background. And not to mention, the music here is amazing. It gives a true sense of adventure before we even get into any of the gameplay. This is where the Zelda games differ largely. The Legend of Zelda for the NES had no story. You were just a little green man with green eyebrows who walks into a cave and gets given a sword. In Zelda 2 we didn't even get that much. We start the game immediately with a sword but still not really any story. A Link to the Past, however, we do have a story, and it's a pretty good story. It gives us a reason to do what we're doing. Link is sleeping but gets woken up by a telepathically speaking Princess Zelda. She tells Link that she is being held prisoner at the Hyrule Castle dungeon and that Aghanim has taken control of the castle and attempts to open up the Wise Man's seal. Link gets out of his bed as his uncle leaves well armoured up. He tells us not to leave the house, so the first thing we do is leave the house. Link shortly after stumbles into his uncle who is also inside the castle. His uncle is fatally wounded and gives Link both the sword and the shield. We further progress through the dungeon, making our way to Princess Zelda. She leads us to a secret passage behind the king's throne and it takes us to a sanctuary, which we meet a sage who swears to keep Princess Zelda safe. He also marks the location of the village elder on our map and tells us to seek out the elder. We arrive at Kakariko Village, a very peaceful area in which we find out that the village elder, Sahasrahla, left when he found out Aghanim was after him. We travel to the Eastern Palace in order to meet with him, and he tells us all about the Master Sword and how the 3 pendants are required to wield it. The first pendant is inside the Eastern Palace, second the Desert Palace, and third the Tower of Hera. In each of these dungeons, just like in almost every other Zelda game, a key item is present in the dungeons. The bow is in the Eastern Palace, the Power Glove is in the Desert Palace, and the Moon Pearl inside the Tower of Hera. Link ventures into the Lost Woods after retrieving these pendants and pulls out the Master Sword. Cool. Sahasrahla contacts us telepathically and tells us that now we can reflect the bolts that Aghanim shoots back at him. With knowing this, we race back over to the castle to fight Aghanim, win, then get transported to the Dark World. Now that we are in the Dark World, we are told that now that the Seal of Wiseman is broken, Hyrule Castle has been transformed into the opening to the Dark World, allowing evil to pass through and reach the Light World. In order to prevent this, Link must retrieve the Triforce by saving the 7 maidens who in turn help Link on his new quest. With saving all 7 of the maidens, they tell Link that he is the descendant of the legendary hero and the Knights of Hyrule. But more importantly, they break the barrier around the Dark Temple and then Link enters in order to finish the evil upon the Dark World. We face Aghanim once more, and upon being defeated, he shows his true form to be Ganon. Link chases him to the pyramid and jumps in to face Ganon for a final time. After a real neat boss battle with Ganon, we defeat him, retrieve the Triforce, and then peace is finally obtained and restored back to Hyrule. A Link to the Past reverts back to the classic top view, which the first Zelda game had. And just like in the original, Link can use items by assigning them to buttons, collecting rupees, use a sword and shield, and complete numerous puzzles. However, in comparison, A Link to the Past features plenty of new content like various new enemies, new characters, a new plotline, and a high quantity of new side quests. This game introduced the 2 divided world mechanic, which allows Link to travel between both light and dark worlds. Nintendo capitalized off of what made the first 2 a huge success and further expanded it. In doing so, created one of the best SNES games in my opinion, and one of the best games of all time in other people's opinion. There are mainly 8 key locations on this brand new overworld, which in the course of the game a majority of things happen. These areas are either home to dungeon locations or used in order to gain access to a dungeon. The overworld in A Link to the Past is amazing compared to the previous game, and the vibrant colours make the world seem more cozy and warm. The overworld theme from the original Zelda also appears in A Link to the Past as the Light World's background music, but it has also been nicely updated to fit the more modern updated style. The gameplay in A Link to the Past is easily the best part of the game. The controls fit perfectly and there simply isn't a better control scheme. A to dash, B to swing your sword, X to check the map, Y to use your selected item. You can run in each direction including the corners now, however in the original it was only up, down, left or right. The dungeons in this game are also quite good. They all have some great puzzles, the items we get inside the temples are brilliant at being good, creative weapons which also help with the progression as well. The visual style and ideas of the bosses are great. The exploration in A Link to the Past is phenomenal. Everywhere you go in the game is filled with distractions. These distractions stray you from the path of the main story. This intrigues you to go and find different things, find bombable walls, find side quests. This is what makes the exploration great. Because whilst the main plot is rather linear, you can still explore the world of Hyrule for mini-games and the sake of meeting the many characters sprawled across the overworld. Both the soundtrack and sound effects in A Link to the Past are fantastic. Koji Kondo yet again is responsible for the composition of this Zelda soundtrack. The music in this game is so iconic to the point where a lot of the music appears in later Zelda games almost always. The music is something you will never get tired of hearing, which is quite funny since they will constantly loop in the background. The songs are just so well suited to each environment and are so nice to listen to as you progress your way through the game. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past is my favourite 2D Zelda game. The atmosphere and graphics are one of the main reasons why that's the case. The amount of colour everything has and the pixels are super clean here. This makes the game truly look great and the detail that is surrounding the game is also magnificent. Shadows become invisible from the forest after the fog clears, the way the water ripples around Link's sprite, and the noise of the stepping across water in the passageways in the dark caves. It's all brilliant. Now, the moment I've been dreading this whole time. My negatives in A Link to the Past. In my opinion, whilst the Ice Palace is easily the most differential looking in the game, it also just sucks. The slippery mechanic is annoying and it makes getting in doorways, stairways and out of the enemy's grasp very hard. For the boss in the dungeon you are told that you should use very little magic throughout the temple. This is in preparation to fight the boss. So when I rocked up to the boss with no magic, I shit you not. I searched the dungeon farming enemies for 15 minutes, clustered up very little magic and obviously couldn't win the fight. This meant I had to leave the dungeon, buy some potions, and go back to the dungeon to which the block pushing puzzle had been reset, which was very annoying. The drops are very unlikely to give you things you actually need, and the rupees you'll only spend for a few things in the game. You'll constantly have a full rupee limit. And earlier I discussed that the visuals and ideas of the bosses were great. It's just some of the bosses are amazing, and some of the bosses are outright stupid. The Skullwoods boss. What is this? Enemies in A Link to the Past are amazing in the Light World. Everything damages as it should, and everything gets damaged as it should. But in the Dark World, everything does such high damage, but also takes such high damage to kill. Okay, I also mentioned in my Super Metroid review plenty of things to do with randomizers. The same goes with A Link to the Past. The game has its own randomizer that you can find online, and there is also a cross-world randomizer that links with Super Metroid. However, I rate A Link to the Past an 8 out of 10. As whilst there are a few negatives, the game is mostly positive and is still a great and very enjoyable Zelda game.